Or is that the sole property of the airport?
Question is, how sacrosanct are the airport funds, and can anybody else later on dip into them?
Right to that.
They are 100% sacrosanct. I can't say it. I track this like a hawk. If there's an error made at City Hall in the receipt of a lease payment or a late fee or whatever, we track it very closely and insist that it be transferred into the proper account. We are set up as an enterprise fund within the city, which is handled like the water department or the wastewater department, but essentially we are set up in such a way that our operating costs must be covered by our revenues, and that's pretty much the way all of your, like say, water and wastewater funds would be set up probably here in Colville. We do not, if there were to be any dipping into the funds, it would have to be set up if we were in such a financial position that there was enough to even another department would want it or would need it. It would have to be set up as a loan. This is audited. It's very auditable. So I can tell you that in our situation, we don't allow any of the funds to go into other areas of the municipal government. It does take watching it very closely, because sometimes it's inadvertent. Something will just get keyed in incorrectly, but we track it very closely. We essentially have two sets of books going on at Deer Park. I keep one set at the airport that we know exactly what we've billed, who's paid, what categories it goes into, and then we compare it to the city's monthly reports. So it's very carefully tracked.
You mentioned grant assurances and city assignment agreement.
There are approximately 30 plus grant assurances, and that is one of them, that the city has to agree to keep those funds with the airport. That every time we get a grant, they sign those assurances again, and it carries on for another 20 years. So there is certainly a recourse if revenue is diverted from the airport fund inadvertently. Now, there are some situations, and I'll get off of this, but there is a situation, for instance, if the city were doing X number of hours of work that were specifically dedicated to airport work, then those funds, those hours can be compensated to the city from the airport fund. So if I have one of the maintenance people come out from the city on a grader or on a backhoe, they will charge the airport $60 an hour for the equipment plus X number of dollars for the labor for the person. So we have to keep track of it in that respect so that it's not handshakes, those are things.
Thank you, Penny. While I think about it, a question came up earlier regarding 395 expansion, rail expansion, other kinds of transportation. Is anybody looking into that? In fact, we are. And one of the speakers that we had invited to be here today is Wayne Brokaw with the General Contractors Association, who's been very intimately involved with the North-South Corridor and soon-to-be 395 expansion. He is scheduled to be we're working on coordinating schedules to get him into one of the chamber luncheons. So keep posted on the chamber monthly if you have questions about that. He's the guy to ask. There's probably no one in our region that knows more about that than he does. So, airport questions. Who's next?
Can I be allowed two short ones?
Sure.
The first one is, Penny, would you be willing to tell the city of Colville all of those airplane owners that have airplanes where they live not to? No, you would. Second question is Mr. Jensen. Is there a process within your modeling of direct impacts, youth impacts, etc., that indicate I know there are benefits, for instance, if someone comes to town using an airport, buy things at a store, hospital, stay at a hotel, buy from a restaurant. Is there anything in the modeling that gives a percentage of those people who are coming to town anyway, whether they do or not?
The question was, in the in-plan modeling software, is there any way to determine how many of those people would have come whether there was an airport or not? Is that correct?
specifically answer your question, no. Because we look at only that sector of visitors and the impacts that airports historically have on their communities. And implant, as you may be aware, has different multipliers by different types of industries and different sectors, and it's pretty cut and dry, basically. Sometimes there's combinations, but it does not look at, say, drive-in traffic versus flying traffic.
Yes, in the back.
Mr. Jensen, when you did the Stevens County and income and so on, did that include Suncrest then, which is the lower end of the county that goes into Spokane?
The question is, when Grant looked at Stevens County statistics, did that include Suncrest, which is also still in the county, just not incorporated?
Our economic impact work and the demographic data that showed on the screen today was within a 30-mile radius of Colville itself. It did not include the lower county.
Abram.
A few questions, please. How much land are you envisioning using for this type of vision airport? And then to the airport person to the airport. So, if there's a shortfall for revenues from the airport, you go back to the city saying, you need help?
Okay. Let's do your first question first. How much land would be needed for the regional scale airport we're talking about? That sounds like either John or Craig.
If we went back to the Broadus Airport slide, I think we had 160 acres for that airport. And really the only difference land-wise was, that was a 4,400-foot runway. This would probably be a 5,000-foot runway. So I would imagine it would be on the order of 150 to 200 acres.
Then the final question is, Penny, if your airport runs short, do you go back to the city for support, or what happens?
Thankfully, I haven't had to address that issue. We have not run short. This past 2 years have been a little more austere, shall we say, but we have not run short. I still ended up with over $20,000 at the end of 2010. Prior to 1996, I guess it was, 1996, 97, the airport was, I don't want to say necessarily supported. There were some revenues that came from the general fund, but on the other hand, some of those other land uses that were being made of the airport were not being compensated. The airport's not being compensated, so the airport may have been self-sufficient many years prior had it actually been handled in the way that the revenue and land use is supposed to be handled. There is a provision within the regulations for land use that the community can go back 6 years, and if monies have been given to the airport during the prior 6 years, those monies can be requested to be repaid, and that's what happened at Deer Park. Actually, I had a mayor that, even though the funds that were originally given to the airport were not considered a loan, they got repaid. So I can truthfully say that we have been self-sufficient, although there was a little period of time in there where I guess we were borrowing a little bit. But I haven't had to go back. If we did have to, it would have to be a decision of the city council as to whether or not to provide a loan to the airport.
Next.
What stage of the program decides what the percentage funding will be from the FAA?
What stage of the program determines?
When does it come along that the FAA makes a commitment on how much they will fund.
Okay, when does the FAA commit to their funding amount for the project?
That's a fairly complicated question, but the FAA has several funding sources that they use to fund airports, and the two primary funding sources that fund airports in this state and all across the country are what they call non-primary entitlement funds. And basically that, at this point in time, each airport, each general aviation airport in the country receives $150,000 in funding per year if they're included in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, the NIPIS, which John mentioned. The other source of funding is what they call state apportionment funding, and I don't know what the level is in Washington. It's about $8 million. And so the FAA would have to make some decisions about how much funding and the timing of that funding that they could send to Colville. If you had an $8 million project, they couldn't send all the state apportionment funds to Colville in a single year, or else all the other airports in the state would suffer. There's also a discretionary funding source that the FAA has, and that's more competitive, and it goes towards those higher priority safety projects around the country. So I know I'm not answering your question, but I would just anticipate that this would be a multi-year project, probably 2 to 4 years in length, and over that period of time, the FAA would fund the project. At what level they would fund, I would hope they would fund it at the 95% level. They have the airport relocation, new airport projects that we've been associated with, they have funded at that level, but it's been over a period of years. I think I might answer your question.
Nancy?
I got a series of questions. Starting with John. You're not going to get off the hook. Keep passing it over. A couple of questions. One, you said the aviation division of WashDOT is paid for through sales tax or tax on aviation fuel. Is that totally the only money that you currently are getting in the aviation division?
So the question is the only funding to the aviation division from the fuel tax sales?
That's our primary source, 90%. The secondary source is through we register aircraft in the state. Most of the aircraft are exempt, but we do, I think, receive about $200,000 from that. And then also we issue dealer's license, which is barely registered. I think it's around a couple $100. So primarily it is the aviation fuel tax that funds our department.
And that is going up or down?
It's interesting. Aviation, corporate aviation, jets, jet fuel, which is not just for jets but other aircraft, is actually increasing. It used to be that general aviation, single, or avgas, what they call, used to fund 50% of our program. Now that's down around 30%, and corporate aviation is the ones funding the system. So there's probably about 150 to 200 aircraft in the system that are funding the system for the rest of us.
And then another question on WashDOT. The material that I've been reading from WashDOT has put a heavy emphasis, not in the aviation division, but for their mission and vision, on maintenance of existing structures, and clearly have said in a couple of documents to not start new projects. How is that translating to the aviation division of WashDOT?
It's similar, I think. One of our primary emphasis is on preservation. But we look at, as DOT does too, is regions of the state. And so if there are regions in the state that are not meeting